West Point, 1909. A young cadet named Terry de la Mesa Allen stood before the commandant, facing expulsion. He had failed mathematics, failed engineering, failed to meet the academy's exacting standards for scholarship and deportment. The son of a career Army officer born at Fort Douglas, Utah on October 1, 1888, Terry Allen had grown up in the shadow of military greatness. Now he was being told he wasn't good enough to join it. The United States Military Academy at West Point prided itself on producing officers of discipline, intellect, and rigid adherence to protocol. Terry Allen possessed none of these qualities in abundance. What he did possess, raw courage, tactical instincts, and an unshakable determination, meant nothing to the Academy's grading system. Most young men would have walked away, their military dreams shattered. Terry Allen enlisted as a private. If West Point wouldn't commission him, he would earn his bars the hard way, from the bottom up, through field performance and sheer stubbornness. He served in the cavalry, proving himself in the field where textbooks didn't matter but guts did. By 1912, just 3 years after his humiliating dismissal from the academy, Allen had earned his commission as a second lieutenant. Not through academic excellence, but through something West Point couldn't teach: the ability to lead men in the field. His fellow officers noticed something different about the young lieutenant who had come up through the ranks. He understood enlisted men because he had been one. He didn't care about spit and polish when combat effectiveness was on the line. Allen's early assignments took him to the Philippines and along the Mexican border during the punitive expedition against Pancho Villa. While academy graduates quoted textbooks, Allen learned to fight in the dirt and chaos of real operations. The Army of 1914 was small, insular, and suspicious of officers who hadn't graduated from West Point. Allen wore his enlisted background like a badge of honor. He drank with his men. He swore like a cavalryman. He led from the front. His superiors wrote conflicting efficiency reports. Some praised his tactical skill and personal bravery. Others criticized his lack of military bearing and disregard for regulations that he considered pointless. Captain Charles Gerhardt, who served with Allen in the cavalry, later recalled, "Terry was the kind of officer who would get drunk with his sergeants on Saturday night and lead them into hell on Monday morning. The men would have followed him anywhere because they knew he'd never ask them to do something he wouldn't do himself." But the peacetime army had limited use for officers who couldn't follow rules. Allen's career seemed destined for mediocrity. Another maverick passed over for promotion while his West Point contemporaries climbed the ranks. Then came April 6, 1917. The United States declared war on Germany. Suddenly, the Army needed fighters, not theorists. It needed officers who understood that war was chaos, not a classroom exercise. It needed men like Terry Allen. World War I would give the washout his first chance to prove what an unconventional soldier could accomplish. In the mud and blood of France, Terry Allen would discover his calling and invent the tactics that would make him the most feared American general 25 years later. France, 1918. While other officers studied textbook tactics, Captain Terry Allen was inventing new ways to kill in the darkness. Allen arrived in France with the 90th Infantry Division, composed largely of conscripts from Texas and Oklahoma. The Western Front had devolved into static trench warfare where daylight attacks meant slaughter. German machine gunners firing the devastating MG-08 Maxim gun at rates exceeding 400 rounds per minute could decimate entire companies crossing no man's land in daylight. Every assault followed the same bloody script: artillery barrage, infantry advance, German machine guns, mass casualties. Allen saw the pattern and rejected it. If daylight favored the defender, he would attack at night. Night attacks were considered nearly impossible in 1918. Formations would become disorganized in darkness. Units would lose contact. Friendly fire would be inevitable. The established wisdom said it couldn't be done. Terry Allen didn't care about established wisdom. He began training his company in night operations, practicing silent movement, navigation by compass and terrain features, and coordination without verbal commands. His men learned to advance in pitch darkness, locate enemy positions by sound, and strike with sudden, overwhelming violence. The key was surprise. German defenders relaxed at night, confident that attacks only came in daylight. Allen's men would infiltrate through wire obstacles under cover of darkness, position themselves within yards of German trenches, then attack at a predetermined time with grenades and bayonets before the enemy could man their machine guns. Lieutenant John Tabor, serving in Allen's company, later wrote, "Captain Allen was absolutely fearless. He'd lead night patrols personally, crawling through no man's land to within 20 yards of German positions. He'd come back covered in mud, grinning like a lunatic, telling us exactly where the machine guns were and how we'd take them out that night." The tactics worked with devastating effectiveness. Allen's night raids inflicted disproportionate casualties while suffering minimal losses. German units facing the 90th Division began to dread the darkness. But success came at a personal cost. On September 26, 1918, during the Meuse-Argonne offensive, Allen led his company in a night assault on German positions near Gurcourt. In the darkness and chaos, he was shot through the mouth, the bullet exiting through his jaw. Most officers would have been evacuated. Allen refused to leave his men. He continued commanding his company for another 3 hours, communicating through hand signals and written notes while bleeding profusely, until the objective was secured. For his actions that night, Allen received the Silver Star and later the French Croix de Guerre. More importantly, he earned a reputation as an officer who led from the front and never quit. German prisoner interrogation reports from late 1918 mentioned the Americans who attacked like ghosts in the night. They didn't know the name Terry Allen yet, but they would learn to fear it. The war ended November 11, 1918. Allen returned home with combat decorations, a scarred face, and a tactical philosophy that would define his career. Surprise the enemy, attack when he feels safe, lead personally, and never let regulations stop you from winning. The peacetime army of the 1920s and 30s had little use for night fighting tactics. Promotions came slowly. Allen spent years as a captain, then major, watching West Point graduates advance while he remained stuck in middle ranks. He drank too much. He spoke too freely. He ignored military courtesy when it conflicted with combat sense. His efficiency reports reflected this: excellent tactical officer, poor disciplinarian, questions orders, not recommended for high command. But Allen kept teaching his unconventional methods to any officers who would listen. At the infantry school at Fort Benning, he lectured on night operations and aggressive leadership. Some called him a dinosaur fighting the last war. Others recognized he was preparing for the next one. By 1942, America was at war again. The Army desperately needed combat leaders who actually understood fighting. Terry Allen, now a brigadier general, finally got his chance. They gave him a division. He would transform it into his personal instrument of war. November 1942, Operation Torch. Major General Terry de la Mesa Allen took command of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, and transformed them into his instrument of war. The 1st Infantry Division was the oldest continuously serving division in the United States Army. Formed in 1917, they wore a distinctive red numeral 1 on their shoulder patches. They had pride and tradition. What they lacked was a commander who would lead them through hell itself. Terry Allen would become that commander. Allen's leadership style shocked officers accustomed to military protocol. He swore constantly. He drank with his sergeants. He showed up at frontline positions during combat wearing a wool cap instead of a helmet, carrying an M1 Garand rifle instead of just a sidearm. Staff Sergeant Raymond Strohmeyer, 16th Infantry Regiment, later recalled, General Allen would show up right behind the lead platoon during an attack. Not safe in some command post right there with us, bullets flying. We'd follow that man into hell because we knew he'd lead the way. The Big Red One landed in North Africa as part of Operation Torch. After initial successes against Vichy French forces, they faced hardened German troops in Tunisia. Allen drove his division hard, emphasizing aggressive patrolling, night attacks when possible, and relentless pressure on German positions. His tactical philosophy from World War I remained unchanged. Keep the enemy off balance. Attack when he least expects it. Never give him time to rest. The division fought through Tunisia in brutal combat. They attacked positions at Gafsa, El Gattar, and Hill 609. By May 13, 1943, the North African campaign ended with Axis surrender. But Allen's methods created friction with his superiors. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley and Lieutenant General George Patton both admired Allen's combat effectiveness but despaired of his discipline. The 1st Infantry Division was becoming Allen's private army, fiercely loyal to their commander, contemptuous of rear echelon officers, prone to brawling when not in combat. Allen encouraged this aggressive spirit, believing it made them better fighters. July 10, 1943. Operation Husky. The invasion of Sicily. The 1st Infantry Division landed at Gela on Sicily's southern coast. German Panzerkampfwagen 4th medium tanks and Tiger heavy tanks counterattacked the beaches while the Americans were still establishing their beachhead. Allen commanded from a jeep near the front lines, coordinating naval gunfire and artillery to repel the German armor. His personal example steadied units that might have broken under the ferocious counterattacks. The Big Red One pushed inland, driving across Sicily toward Palermo. Allen ignored boundary lines assigned by higher headquarters, racing his division forward to capture objectives before other units could claim them. By early August, Sicily was conquered. The 1st Infantry Division had proven themselves one of the finest fighting formations in the American Army. German intelligence reports from Sicily noted the aggressiveness and night fighting capability of American units, particularly mentioning the 1st Infantry Division's unconventional tactics and relentless pressure. But Allen's victory carried the seeds of his downfall. The division's discipline problems had worsened: brawls with British troops, disregard for military regulations. Bradley wrote in his efficiency report, "Allen is an outstanding combat commander but has allowed the 1st Division to become nearly uncontrollable. Excellent in battle, impossible in garrison." On August 7, 1943, Allen received orders relieving him of command. Both he and Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. were being sent back to the United States. Allen was devastated. The Big Red One was his creation, his family, his purpose. But Terry Allen was not finished. Not by a long shot. They had taken away his beloved division. He would build something even more fearsome. August 1943. Despite leading the Big Red One to victory across North Africa and Sicily, Terry Allen was relieved of command. General Dwight Eisenhower and Lieutenant General Omar Bradley made the decision together. The stated reasons were exhaustion and the need for fresh leadership after months of continuous combat. The real reasons cut deeper. Allen's division had become too independent, too loyal to their commander rather than the chain of command. His disregard for protocol and boundaries had made him effective but dangerous to military order. Bradley later wrote, "I had to relieve Allen. He had turned the 1st Division into a superb fighting force, but it was his division, not the Army's. That kind of personal loyalty is magnificent in battle but impossible to control." For Allen, the relief was devastating. He had poured everything into the Big Red One: his experience, his tactical innovations, his personal courage. They were his men, and he had been ripped away from them. Private First Class Samuel Fuller, 16th Infantry Regiment, remembered Allen's departure. When word spread that General Allen was leaving, grown men cried, "He'd led us through hell and back. We would have followed him anywhere. Losing him felt like losing our father." Allen returned to the United States in September 1943, facing an uncertain future. At 55 years old, he could have retired, his combat career finished. Instead, he requested another combat command. Any combat command. The Army, recognizing his tactical brilliance despite his disciplinary problems, gave him the 104th Infantry Division, the Timberwolves. They were a newly formed division, untested in combat, composed largely of draftees with no battle experience. Allen arrived at Camp Carson, Colorado in November 1943 to take command. The division expected a broken man relieved in disgrace, assigned to train replacements far from the fighting. They got Terry Allen with something to prove. He immediately began transforming the Timberwolves using every lesson learned from World War I and the Mediterranean campaigns. Aggressive patrolling, combined arms coordination, and especially night attacks, his signature tactical innovation. Allen drove the division through intensive training focused on night operations, movement in darkness, silent coordination, sudden overwhelming violence. The tactics he had pioneered in France 25 years earlier would become the Timberwolves' specialty. And he told his officers, "We're going to be the best night-fighting division in the army. The Germans own the daylight with their tanks and artillery. We'll own the night." By August 1944, the 104th Infantry Division was ready. They shipped to France and entered combat in September, just as the Allied advance was stalling against German defenses. Allen had his redemption opportunity, and the Germans were about to learn to fear the darkness again. September 1944, Northwest Europe. German soldiers defending the Siegfried Line learned to fear the darkness and the howl of the Timberwolf. The 104th Infantry Division entered combat in Holland and eastern France, facing veteran German troops occupying fortified positions. Where other American divisions struggled against prepared defenses, Allen's Timberwolves attacked when the enemy felt safest at night. Allen had transformed the division into a precision night-fighting force. His men practiced silent movement, navigation by compass and terrain features, and coordination without verbal commands. They learned to infiltrate German lines in total darkness, position themselves within yards of enemy positions, then strike with sudden, overwhelming violence. The tactics were devastatingly effective. German defenders, relaxed and confident during nighttime hours, would suddenly face attacks from directions they thought secure. By the time they manned their machine guns and organized resistance, American infantry were already in their positions with grenades and bayonets. Major General Charles Gerhardt, commanding the adjacent 29th Infantry Division, observed, "Allen's Timberwolves fought like ghosts. They'd attack at 3 in the morning, take an objective the Germans thought was secure, and be digging in before dawn." The Germans were terrified of them. The division pushed through the Siegfried Line fortifications in October and November, reducing concrete bunkers and pillboxes through combined night attacks and daylight consolidation. Where other divisions measured progress in yards per day, the Timberwolves advanced through coordinated night infiltration. German prisoner interrogation reports from late 1944 specifically mentioned the 104th Division's night tactics. Obergefreiter Klaus Weber, captured near Aachen, stated, "We called them the Nachtjäger, the night hunters. You could not rest at night knowing they were opposite your positions. They would appear from nowhere, kill your sentries silently, and be inside your defenses before you could react." Allen commanded from the front, just as he had with the Big Red One. He visited frontline positions during attacks, encouraged his men personally, and shared their dangers. The division developed the same fierce loyalty to Allen that the 1st Infantry Division had shown. But this time, Allen had learned. He maintained stricter discipline in rear areas, kept his division within assigned boundaries, and coordinated properly with adjacent units. He gave his superiors no excuse to relieve him again. The Timberwolves drove into Germany proper, fighting through the winter of 1944 and 45. They crossed the Rohr River in February, pushed through the Rhineland, and drove toward the Ruhr industrial region. In every engagement, Allen's night attack tactics gave his division an edge. German defenders never knew when or where the Timberwolves would strike. The psychological impact was as important as the tactical advantage. Enemy units facing the 104th spent their nights in constant fear. Private Robert Rowe, 313th Infantry Regiment, remembered, "General Allen would show up at our positions before a night attack, give us one of his profane pep talks, then watch us move out. He made you feel invincible, like no matter what happened, he'd get us through it." By April 1945, the Timberwolves had advanced deep into Germany, their night attacks helping to collapse German resistance across a broad front. They had earned a reputation as one of the most effective divisions in the European theater. Terry Allen had proven himself again. The washout from West Point, relieved in disgrace from the 1st Infantry Division, had built a second elite formation that terrified German defenders across Europe. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe. The guns fell silent. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe. Terry Allen had commanded 2 divisions to triumph through the most brutal fighting of the war. The numbers told part of his story. Two elite divisions, shaped by his leadership. The 1st Infantry Division through North Africa and Sicily. The 104th Infantry Division through Northwest Europe. Campaigns spanning 3 years of continuous combat. Thousands of soldiers trained in his aggressive, unconventional methods. Allen received the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Distinguished Service Medals, the Silver Star and the French Croix de Guerre. But the decorations mattered less than what he had accomplished. German intelligence assessments from the war specifically identified Allen's divisions as among the most dangerous American formations. Post-war interrogations revealed that German commanders feared units known for night attacks and aggressive leadership, exactly what Allen had built twice. General Major Rudolf Freiherr von Gersdorff, who commanded German forces facing American divisions in France, stated after the war, "The American divisions commanded by aggressive leaders who understood night operations were our greatest concern. They gave us no rest, attacked when we felt secure, and their commanders led from the front." This combination was devastating to German morale. Allen retired from active duty in 1947 at the rank of Major General. He had never made it through West Point. He had never mastered military protocol. He had been relieved from his 1st Division command in what many considered disgrace. But he had proven that unconventional officers who understood combat could win battles when textbook commanders failed. Allen spent his retirement years in El Paso, Texas, where he died on September 12, 1969, at age 80. Former soldiers from both the 1st and 104th Divisions attended his funeral, honoring the general who had led them through hell and brought so many home alive. His tactical innovations, particularly night attack doctrine, became standard training in the United States Army. Modern special operations forces still study Allen's methods for infiltration, surprise, and aggressive leadership under fire. Staff Sergeant William McClintock, who served under Allen in both the Big Red 1 and the Timberwolves, reflected years later, "General Allen was the kind of officer the Army needed in war, but couldn't handle in peace. He understood one thing perfectly: how to close with the enemy and destroy him while keeping as many of his own men alive as possible. Everything else was secondary." The Germans had many names for American units and commanders they faced in World War II. But few American generals earned the kind of respect and fear that Terry Allen commanded. He never conquered his demons. He drank too much, swore too much, broke too many rules. But when it mattered most, when his nation needed fighters who could win battles against the most professional army in the world, Terry Allen delivered. Twice. The washout from West Point became the nightmare of the Wehrmacht. The officer, relieved in disgrace, built a 2nd Elite Division that Germans learned to fear even more than the 1st. Terry Allen never made it through the academy. He never mastered spit and polish military bearing. He never stopped leading from the front or caring more about his soldiers than his career. But he understood one thing better than almost any American general of World War II: how to win battles and bring his men home alive. The Germans called him Terrible Terry for good reason. He was their nightmare, and he earned that fear through 2 divisions, 3 campaigns, and 4 years of proving that courage, innovation, and loyalty to your men matter more than any academy diploma.